Now we turn to the chief Brexit negotiator, Michel Barnier.
Thank you, President Tajani, to you and to President Juncker, to allow me to speak in this debate that we've listened to very attentively. Madam Minister, distinguished members, I'm happy to be here. The majority of British citizens have chosen sovereignly to leave the European Union. That's a choice that we regret. But a choice that we respect. And now we'll be putting it. We will be implementing it. Brexit means Brexit. At this stage, I would like to say two things that everybody here and everywhere else should understand and be mindful of. First of all, as regards the United Kingdom, which has chosen to leave the Union, we've always had, and right until the end, for this great country, its culture, its people, its history, which showed solidarity with us in the most tragic moments, for its diplomacy, for this country, the respect that is due to a great country, an allied country. The second point, that everybody should understand that in this negotiation, which is extraordinary and complex, and extraordinarily complex, our responsibility, yours, that of the Council, clearly, that of the Commission, under the authority of President Juncker, our responsibility is to preserve for the future and for the long term what we are, our union, our values, our identity, our single market, our common policies. None of that, ladies and gentlemen, none of that is up for negotiation, and we're responsible for that. Every day, just a personal point, in the mission that has been entrusted to me, first by President Juncker, and which you're following, ladies and gentlemen, I bear in mind something that a French statesman said, who said in a speech, never sacrifice the future for the present. Never sacrifice the future for the present. Mr. Hökmark just now, Mrs. McGuinness, said that very forcefully. And in this negotiation, at the end of this debate, I'd like to share with you three messages. First of all, we have to put things in the right order, as we have done from the very start, to prepare and construct the new ambitious partnership with the United Kingdom. The prerequisite is to organize its withdrawal in an orderly fashion, rather than in a disorderly fashion. Mr. Gualtieri stressed that. Under the authority of President Juncker, who would like to thank for his confidence, the Commission, which is working, which is doing the task that you entrusted it, 15 days ago, presented this draft treaty. Things are clear. You can have it in your hands via this draft treaty. The idea is to accelerate and facilitate the discussion with the British, working on a legal text. As Mrs. Hübner said very well, and President Juncker, time is very short. It's very short for the negotiation, for the withdrawal agreement. It will be short for the negotiation of any future relationship. It is also short, and I'd like to stress this point, for the preparation which we have to carry out in each of our countries together with the stakeholders to prepare the consequences, the inevitable consequences of Brexit, which the British have chosen. And this preparation is being carried out by the Commission by our Secretary General, Martin Zellmeyer, who I'd like to thank. So time is short. On this text, there are some points that which are particularly attentive to, which some of you have pointed out, and which you pointed to, Guy, in this resolution. Clearly, first of all, the first priority is the citizens, our common priority. Right to the end, we'll be attentive, that is to say, right up to the ratification of the withdrawal agreement. We will be attentive to the guarantees that we have obtained in the December report on the effective implementation of all the rights within simple and cost-effective solutions. Mrs. Miranda and Mrs. Zimmer, or Mrs. Simona, Mrs. Evans, and Mr. Weidenholzer, you raised this question, the priority of the citizens' rights. British citizens who have chosen to live and work in one of our 27 countries, and the 3.5 million people, including many students, Europeans who live and work in the UK. We also expect from the UK a sincere commitment and advances in the days ahead on all the subjects when it comes to the governance of the Euratom Treaty. Just to give some examples, these are subjects which we haven't negotiated fully, where there isn't an agreement, which are a part of all the subjects of the separation which are essential for an orderly withdrawal. That also applies to the transition. We accept, the European leaders, you have accepted the request of the UK government presented by Theresa May to include a period of transition in the withdrawal agreement. And clearly, within this short transition period, respecting Article 50, all the rules of the Union will apply without any distinction. A citizen who arrives, for example, during the period of transition, Mrs. Bresso mentioned this, should benefit from the same rights as a citizen who arrived before the day of Brexit. There's a second point, which is that which was mentioned in your resolution of our future partnership. In this text, you set out the architecture and the content, as the European Council will have done under the authority of Donald Tusk, of what could be this partnership, this ambitious partnership with the UK. Guy Verhofstadt talked about the future association with this great country based around 4 pillars. And I can relate to this architecture that you propose. Our trade relationship. Mr. Zulig talked about that we must be rules for the future trade with the UK. As Mr. van der Kara said, Mr. Millamon and Mrs. Miranda said, we need to have a balanced agreement on the question of fisheries. Secondly, thematic cooperation. Mr. Lopez Aguilar talked about aviation. Mr. Van Dalen talked about research or universities. I could mention Erasmus. Within a different financial framework than today, because the UK has chosen to leave the Union, we'll have a framework cooperation to maintain this work in the common interest together with the British. 3, cooperation in terms of justice, internal affairs, police cooperation and judicial cooperation. Finally, clearly, with this great country, a strategic partnership for foreign affairs, security and defence. When it comes to the first pillar, that of economic cooperation, at the current time, all the models of cooperation with third countries are on the table. They're available.
We are open for business. It's the UK that is closing doors.
I listened attentively to the Theresa May's Mansion House speech, which confirms that the doors that the UK is closing itself by confirming the red lines, leaving the single market, leaving the customs union. Elmar Brok pointed out this red line. Another member too. And several of you talked about trade relationships and not having any jurisdiction of the ECJ. Those are the UK's red lines. We have noted, but clearly you can't have the status of a third country and at the same time asked for the advantages of partnership with the Union. And Philippe Lambert's talked about that. You couldn't use the single market à la carte. Mr. Reynolds just now, or Mr. Danti, said this. It's an integrated ecosystem, and the four freedoms, including the freedom of movement, are indivisible and indissociable. You can't want to participate in our agencies without a legal commitment of applying the law of the Union and the jurisdiction of the Court of Justice. You won't be able to ask from the outside the mutual recognition of rules and standards, and that can only be based on confidence, that is to say common law, cohesion, supervision and single supervision. Ladies and gentlemen, President, that's a rather surprising idea, to think that the 27 member states of the EU and your Parliament could accept sort of convergence as wished by the UK, and at the same time open up the possibility for divergence when there is a comparative advantage to be had for it.
It's time to face up the hard facts. Mr.
Ferreira, Mr. Longam, Mrs. Scott Cato mentioned the question of standards in the UK. That'll be a third country and a sovereign country, and here too. That's an important point. That's a question which I asked some weeks ago, and to which we don't have any answer from the UK yet. The UK is choosing to leave the Union, the single market and the customs union. We've noted that. Do they also want to distance themselves from our regulatory model, the one that we have constructed together with you and you with us for 44 years? A regulatory model which is not just a question of standards and law and norms. Behind that, there are some societal choices which we've made together. The social market economy, social protection, security, safety, and certain food models, financial regulations. I could give you other examples of these common choices of society which we've made together, 28, which are translated and consolidated by this regulatory model. And that's an important question. Does the UK want to distance itself also from this model which we've constructed gradually with it, and engage in dumping against us? It's not just relevant for the economy and consumers and citizens. It's also important for the political conditions of the ratification of any future agreement between us and the UK, because on that day, for the European Parliament, they will have to speak, but for the Council too. And also by unanimity of all the national and perhaps regional parliaments on this question of divergence or the risk of dumping. That will be looked at very attentively. My final point is the question of Ireland, which is at the junction of what we are, we Europeans, and what is represented and what Brexit means. Mrs. McGuinness mentioned that very forcefully. Everyone knows that the Union has played its role and has taken its part in the process of peace in Northern Ireland for a common horizon, the conditions of stability of dialogue between communities which used to be divided. The Union isn't responsible for the consequences of Brexit, but it is accountable for this cooperation, for this stability and this common future. That's why, as many of you wished, a solid and durable agreement on Brexit, listen to me carefully, on the ordered withdrawal must include a solid and durable solution for Ireland and Northern Ireland.
Et c'est le sens du protocole.
And that is the sense of the protocol that we proposed in this draft withdrawal agreement. This option, this third option, which we have operationalised, is part of the common commitments between us and the UK at the highest level, that of Theresa May and President Juncker and Donald Tusk. This document only puts into implements one of the options in the December agreement. I'm saying this to the Mr. Nicholson, who I also listened to attentively. It is one of the options that we have decided to study to have some concrete solutions. It's our responsibility to make this operational, how we will avoid a hard border on the island of Ireland in the absence of other solutions, and taking into account of the decision of the UK to leave the single market and the customs union. I will always repeat this backstop solution, which is one of the three. We are prepared to replace it by any other solution which might be better, which might be proposed by the British government. That is a point which was raised by Mr. McCarthy or Richard Corbett just now. So, by way of a conclusion, Madam Minister, ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to confirm the solidity, the clarity of the position of the Union, our unity on the subject of the withdrawal and the future. That is what makes us strong in this negotiation. This clarity, this solidity, wouldn't be possible without the confidence which you give to our negotiating team and your negotiating team, and we'll continue to work, as I said, to the Brexit steering group and to Guy Verhofstadt, and with a permanent attitude to dialogue and transparency with you. I'd like to thank you, Mr. President, and Guy and all the members of the Brexit steering group, the President of the group, your coordinators, for the quality and the sincerity of your work together. And I think that the resolution that you will adopt is essential for the success of the steps that we have in front of us. Thank you very much for your attention.